Fred Rogers hosted almost 900 episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood over 31 seasons on public broadcasting stations.
Fred Rogers wasn't just America's gentle neighbor. He was a man of deep conviction. Whether silencing corporations that mocked his message or standing up to hate groups hijacking his voice, Fred never flinched when his values were tested. But one day, on a quiet set filled with familiar faces, something happened that shook him to the core. It wasn't loud or scandalous, but it crossed a line he refused to ignore. So, what exactly could make Mr. Rogers walk away for good? Let's uncover the truth behind this unforgettable moment. Fred Rogers, the quiet power of kindness. Well, you never really know what someone else might be going through. That was something Fred Rogers often said and lived by. It wasn't just a line. It was his quiet way of responding to the frustrations of the world, the moments when others would have raised their voices or stormed off. He didn't need to shout to be heard. He believed in the power of gentleness, the importance of listening, and above all, the simple but profound act of kindness. Fred wasn't born a saint, nor did he ever want to be seen as one. His wife, Joanne, made that clear in a candid interview. She laughed gently as she remembered how the world had started to paint him as something almost otherworldly. He worked hard at being good, she said. It didn't just happen. She never wanted people to forget that he struggled, just like everyone else. That behind the soft voice and cardigan sweaters was a man who put in the work, who wrestled with the harder parts of life, grief, anger, loneliness, and chose love every time. When Tom Hanks agreed to portray Fred Rogers in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Joanne was thrilled. Fred had adored Hanks's films, especially Forrest Gump, which he reportedly watched over 40 times. Though the two never met, Joanne believed Fred would have been delighted by the casting. Not just because he was a fan, but because Tom Hanks carried something Fred valued deeply: sincerity. Tom Hanks, while reflecting on playing Rogers, realized how deceptively deep the man's legacy was. "You think, because he spoke to children, that the message was simple," he said on The Graham Norton Show. But he was like a philosopher, a gentle one. One episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood began with a dead goldfish in a tank. Simple, right? Yet by the end of the show, grown adults found themselves in tears. That was Fred. He used life's smallest moments to talk about life's biggest truths. Music was his companion in those conversations. Sometimes he would sit at the piano and softly sing, "It's good to talk. It's good to say the things we feel." He believed that acknowledging emotion, fear, sadness, confusion, was not a weakness, but a gateway to healing. He gave children and adults alike permission to feel. At home, Joanne recalled how his calm often clashed with her fiery moments. "I'd be venting after a frustrating encounter, and Fred would gently say, 'You just never know what kind of day that person's had.' It wasn't the response she always wanted, but it was the one that made her pause, breathe, and soften. Fred never demanded peace. He offered it. He loved deeply and showed it in little ways. Joanne smiled as she touched the ring he gave her, shaped like a crown. "He used to call me Queen Sarah," she said, her voice warm. Another ring, her engagement band, had a diamond once owned by Fred's grandfather. His gestures were quiet but meaningful, just like him. Fred passed away on February 27th, a date that held dual significance for Joanne. It was also her late mother's birthday. Grief and love coexisted in that day, much like they did in Fred's philosophy. Perhaps his most enduring message is one Tom Hanks recalled fondly: "The 3 secrets to happiness: be kind, be kind, be kind." In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, Fred Rogers didn't just ask us to be better. He showed us how. His legacy isn't carved into monuments or proclaimed in grand speeches. It lives in the quietest corners, in a melody hummed under your breath, in the hesitation before reacting, in the small kindnesses that ripple outward. In those moments, Fred Rogers still speaks. But to fully understand what might drive a man like Fred Rogers to quietly walk away from a set he once believed in, we must return to where the quiet strength began. The quiet boy who taught the world to listen. Fred Rogers didn't become a cultural icon by accident. His kindness was forged in silence, shaped by loneliness, and awakened by a deep desire to make others feel seen. While the world would come to know him as the soft-spoken man in the cardigan, few knew that the heart behind Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was once a scared little boy, peeking from behind a window while life passed him by. Born in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and in 1928, surrounded by comfort and every toy a child could ask for, but none of it could protect him from the loneliness that crept in with each passing day. Sickly and often confined indoors, he watched life unfold from behind glass windows while other kids played freely. His mother tried to ease his isolation with music and hand-sewn puppets, but the silence of solitude left deep imprints on his heart. And that silence, in time, would become the very language he used to connect with millions of children. There was one place, however, where Fred felt truly alive: his grandfather's farm. Every Sunday, he'd run through the fields, barefoot and free, hearing the words that would stay with him forever. "Freddie, you make my day very special just by being you." That simple affirmation became the foundation of Fred's message to the world, that every child deserved to feel seen, heard, and loved. Yet the outside world wasn't as kind. Around age 11, Fred was bullied, cruelly taunted by boys who chased him through the streets, calling him Fat Freddy. He ran until he couldn't breathe, his cheeks burning from more than just exhaustion. That moment scarred him deeply, but it also gave him a purpose. Years later, when he sat in front of a camera speaking gently about bullying, it wasn't from a script, it was from memory. Fred wasn't born confident. He entered high school still carrying the weight of teasing and isolation. But one unexpected friendship with a classmate named Jim changed everything. Encouraged to step out of his shell, Fred joined the student council, explored theater, and found his voice through music. By his senior year, he was student council president, a quiet boy who had learned the transformative power of kindness and friendship. Music became his true anchor. After a brief start at Dartmouth, Fred transferred to Rollins College in Florida, where he studied music composition and graduated with honors in 1951. He wrote over 200 original pieces, and music would later become the emotional heartbeat of his television work, helping children make sense of fear, sadness, and joy. That same year, a visit home introduced Fred to something that would change his life yet again: television. But what he saw, loud slapstick, meaningless gags, left him shaken. He didn't laugh. He saw a tool with enormous potential being used for nonsense. That was the moment Fred made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would go into television, not to entertain, but to elevate. He would use that flickering screen to speak gently, honestly, and meaningfully to children who, like his younger self, needed someone to simply understand. And so, long before that one scene made him walk away, Fred Rogers had already chosen to stand for something greater. A camera for a pulpit. His childhood longing to make others feel seen eventually pulled Fred Rogers away from the loud, polished world of commercial television and into something far more personal, something that spoke not to profits, but to hearts. Though Fred had started strong in 1951 at NBC, working on popular shows like Your Hit Parade, he soon realized the glitter of mainstream television wasn't for him. He'd helped move props, watched live productions unfold with tight schedules and tighter scripts. But behind all that movement, he saw something missing: authentic care. The pressure from sponsors, the noisy ads, and the rush for ratings left him cold. It wasn't the medium he hated, it was how it was used. So in 1953, without fanfare, he stepped away. That same year, Fred returned to Pittsburgh, not just with a clearer purpose, but with a plan. He enrolled at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and, at the same time, began studying child psychology under Dr. Margaret McFarland. Most people chose one path. Fred chose three: faith, emotion, and media. And he never looked back. His mission wasn't to preach in churches, but to speak directly to children using television as his pulpit. Joining WQED, America's first community-funded educational TV station, Fred began building something completely new. The studio was a modest, converted mansion. The budget was thin, and the crew was small. But Fred didn't need much. He was a puppeteer, composer, organist, and co-producer all at once. From that little room, a kingdom of characters emerged. Daniel Striped Tiger, Lady Elaine Fairchild, X the Owl, each one shaped from real relationships, filled with emotional depth. These weren't just puppets. They were mirrors for children's fears, joys, and questions. The simple show, The Children's Corner, was meant to introduce short films, but Fred infused it with full stories, soul, and warmth. It quietly became a national gem, even airing on NBC. Yet Fred stayed out of the spotlight. He wanted children to connect with the characters, not him. For 8 years, he juggled seminary classes during lunch breaks, live studio shoots, and even weekly trips to New York. It was exhausting, but he never wavered. And in 1963, when Fred Rogers was ordained, not to lead a congregation but to serve children through television, it marked a moment of rare understanding. The church recognized that its sanctuary wasn't inside four walls. It was inside a screen, and through it, he preached love, honesty, and the message that every child mattered. But how did a soft-spoken puppeteer, never seeking fame, become the heart behind a national treasure? Stay tuned. The moment Fred stepped into the spotlight. And just like that, the camera became his pulpit. After years of quietly shaping children's television from behind the scenes, Fred Rogers found himself in an unexpected place, on screen. It happened in 1963 when he moved to Canada to work with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. There, under the encouragement of CBC's Fred Rainsbury, he stepped in front of the camera for the very first time. Shy and unsure, he hesitated, but something clicked. With a soft tone and a direct gaze into the lens, Fred began speaking not at children, but to them, gently, sincerely, as if he had all the time in the world. That 15-minute Canadian program ran for 337 episodes, quietly laying the foundation for what would later bloom into a television legacy. By the time he returned to Pittsburgh in 1966, Fred wasn't just returning home, he was bringing back the heart of something deeply meaningful. He bought the rights to his Canadian show and got to work at WQED, the same community station where he'd once juggled puppets and organ music. This time, though, his vision was clearer. He blended fantasy with reality, pulling threads from the neighborhood of make-believe while anchoring the stories in moments that felt honest and human. It began as a local show, But when the Sears Roebuck Foundation stepped in with funding, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood launched nationwide on February 19, 1968. Unlike the flashy, chaotic pace of most children's TV at the time, Fred's show slowed everything down. The rhythm was thoughtful, even meditative. Each episode began with the same quiet ritual. He'd enter, smile warmly, sing a gentle song, slip off his jacket, and put on a cardigan and sneakers. That wasn't just a habit, it was an invitation, a signal to every child watching that they were stepping into a safe space where they mattered. Few knew that those sweaters were hand-knit by his mother until her passing in 1981, or that Fred, colorblind, didn't even realize the famous red cardigan was red at all. Still, it wasn't about the color. It was about the comfort. In a world that often felt rushed and loud, Fred Rogers gave children something rare and powerful, a quiet moment of kindness and the unshakable assurance that they were loved just as they were. The quiet power that changed everything. While the world around him grew louder, more chaotic, and more commercialized, Fred Rogers remained quietly and steadily committed to one thing: making children feel seen, safe, and deeply valued. In 1969, just as public television faced a major financial blow, Rogers made his way to Washington, D.C., not with a flashy campaign or a prepared army of lobbyists, but with a calm voice and a heart full of purpose. President Nixon's administration had proposed slashing public television's funding in half, from $20 million to just $10 million. To most, the battle seemed already lost. But when Rogers stood before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Communications, he didn't argue. He connected. Facing Senator John Pastore, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Rogers set aside his written statement and instead shared what truly mattered: how his show spoke directly to a child's emotional needs. He spoke of trust, of anger, of helping children understand their feelings without violence or flashy distractions. Then, almost like a lullaby, he recited a song he'd written for children struggling to manage their emotions. What do you do with the mad that you feel? It was gentle, sincere, and raw. Something in that moment shifted. The hardened senator, visibly moved, responded with a quiet smile. "Looks like you just earned the $20 million. But that wasn't the only revolution Rogers led that week. Just days later, on May 9th, he aired an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that spoke volumes without saying much at all. At a time when the idea of black and white Americans sharing a public pool still triggered outrage in parts of the country, Rogers invited Officer Clemens, played by black actor Francois Clemens, to join him in soaking their feet together. Side by side, with their shoes off and their feet cooling in the same small wading pool, they shared a towel. It was a simple act. No lectures, no protests, just humanity. And it delivered a message far louder than words. Dignity and kindness know no color. Even decades later, Rogers continued that quiet devotion. Behind the scenes, he would eventually kneel before Clemens and wash his feet in a deeply personal moment of thanks. A scene never televised, but remembered as one of the show's most heartfelt truths. From its national launch in 1968, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood grew to reach nearly 1.8 million homes by the mid-1980s. Rogers wrote every script, crafted every puppet, composed more than 200 songs, and even produced 13 operas, all in service of one mission: to remind children that they are loved just as they are. But as other children's shows raced toward commercialism, Rogers refused to join in. He never allowed his show to sell toys or sugary cereals. When Burger King aired a parody of him in an ad, he shut it down immediately. He believed children's programming should nurture, not manipulate, and he was disturbed by the growing trend of turning young viewers into lifelong consumers. As he once said, not proudly but pointedly, "A child is appreciated for what he will be, a great consumer someday." Even his personal life echoed that ethos. In the early 1970s, Rogers became a vegetarian after reading Diet for a Small Planet, declaring, "I don't want to eat anything that has a mother." On his show, scenes in restaurants never featured meat. He even wrote a song to protest the dying of baby chicks for Easter. Every choice, however small, was an extension of his belief in compassion for children, for animals, for everyone. Fred Rogers didn't seek to entertain. He aimed to care. He didn't demand attention, he earned trust. And in a world often chasing the loudest voices, it was his soft-spoken strength that reminded everyone, especially the youngest among us, that their feelings mattered, their lives mattered, and they were enough, just as they were. In the end, Rogers didn't just create television, he created a sanctuary. But what made Fred Rogers' gentle presence feel like a sanctuary in every living room? Stay glued to your screen. Fred Rogers' Gentle Rebellion. Then, without warning, the show shifted into something most children's programs never dared to touch. Not with cartoons, not with catchy jingles. Just a soft-spoken man in a cardigan, speaking directly to young hearts. In June 1968, only 2 days after Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, Fred Rogers faced the camera, not to distract children, but to help them understand what just happened. Through his puppet, Daniel's striped tiger, he posed a question that echoed through American households. What does assassination mean? It was a moment that defined the essence of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred didn't run from the pain, he opened the door to it, gently and without fear. To him, pretending everything was fine was far more damaging than telling the truth with compassion. From the earliest days of the show, he made it his mission to help children confront the scariest parts of life: divorce, death, war, even racism, with honesty and care. Not to burden them, but to give them power. His philosophy was simple, but radical. Whatever is mentionable is manageable. By naming fears, you take away their ability to control you. Fred Rogers wasn't guessing either. He worked hand in hand with child psychologists to shape the show's tone, structure, and content. Every word was considered. Every topic had a purpose. And every child watching was treated as someone worthy of the truth. But Fred didn't stop at making difficult subjects accessible. He went further. He showed kids that feelings, even uncomfortable ones, were not only okay, but necessary. Anger, sadness, fear, they weren't to be avoided. They were to be explored, understood, and expressed. He didn't just tell children they were special. He showed them why they were, and how to live with emotional honesty. And yet, despite his calm presence on screen, the real Fred Rogers had a surprisingly mischievous side. Between 1985 and 1990, the set of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was filled with warmth, jokes, and laughter. None of it staged for the camera. One day, as Fred began his routine of changing into sneakers, he noticed something was off. His shoes wouldn't fit. The crew had swapped them out for smaller ones as a prank. Rather than break character or lose his patience, Fred tried to squeeze his feet in anyway, chuckling as he sang through the moment. The entire crew burst into laughter, and so did Fred. On another occasion, someone left a cheeky photo in his path. Most hosts might have scolded Fred. He had it blown up into a huge poster, and gifted it to the prankster for Christmas. That kind of joy wasn't an act. It was who he was. Long after his retirement in 2001, Fred confessed what he missed most wasn't the fame, or even the show itself. It was the camaraderie, the playful, loving chaos that surrounded the people who made the neighborhood feel real. In 1985, Fred broke the mold again, this time by bringing viewers behind the curtain. He stepped off the set and introduced the musicians who had filled each episode with life. But these weren't background players. They were top-tier jazz professionals. Johnny Costa on piano, Joe Negri on guitar, Carl McVicker Jr. on bass, and Bobby Rawsthorne on percussion. They didn't follow scripts. They followed Fred. Every note was live, improvised, and tailored to the moment. Costa would watch Fred closely, scoring each scene in real time, letting emotion guide the melody. When Fred introduced them on camera, he wasn't just giving credit. He was teaching children something bigger, that every person, no matter their role, matters deeply. Fred Rogers didn't just change children's television. He changed how children saw themselves. With truth, music, laughter, and love, he built a neighborhood where it was safe to feel everything, and where every child knew they belonged. The quiet power behind the cardigan. But Fred Rogers' real strength wasn't just in what he said. It was in how he treated people when no one was looking. Though an ordained minister, he never preached on Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. He never mentioned God. Yet every moment of the show reflected a deep spiritual core, one built on love, kindness, and patience. Public television rules meant he had to keep religion off the air, but Fred found a way to weave faith into his storytelling without ever using sacred words. He taught children how to name their fears, handle loss, and understand emotions, not with sermons, but with soft words and honest care. To him, the show was a ministry of presence. It may surprise some to learn that Fred Rogers was a lifelong Republican, but he didn't care much for party lines. He cared about people. When conservative critics later blamed him for making kids feel too special, Fred stayed steady, never defensive. In 1969, he stood before the U.S. Senate and calmly defended public television, arguing for children's mental health and creative learning. His widow, Joanne, would later say that Fred's values clashed deeply with Donald Trump's and believed that had he lived longer, he might have reconsidered his political stance. But Fred's beliefs were always about action, not affiliation. That same quiet conviction shaped his relationship with Francois Clemens, the black actor who played Officer Clemens. In 1968, Fred gave him a regular role, the first for a black man in children's TV. A year later, during rising racial tensions, Fred invited Francois to share a small pool and wash their feet together on screen, a peaceful but bold gesture. Their friendship was real, but it wasn't without pain. When Fred discovered that Francois was gay, he asked him to stay quiet for fear it might end the show. Years passed, hearts broke, but Fred changed. He apologized, welcomed Francois's partners, and stood by him. He never made a public statement, but his quiet actions spoke louder than any speech. In the end, Fred Rogers didn't just teach children how to be kind, he lived it. Every choice was deliberate, every gesture a sermon of its own. But what forced Fred Rogers to take legal action for one of the few times in his life? Stay glued to your screen. How Fred protected the neighborhood. But even a man who built his world on kindness eventually had to draw a line. And Fred Rogers knew exactly where to place it. In a bizarre and heartbreaking twist in 1990, hate came wearing a friendly face. The Ku Klux Klan, seeking to poison young minds, created tapes mimicking the gentle voice of Mr. Rogers to deliver vile, racist messages. They sounded eerily like episodes from his beloved show, but instead of love, they pushed fear, even describing lynchings. The tapes, passed around schools, horrified Fred. He was devastated, not for his own reputation, but for the children whose sense of safety was being exploited. He responded swiftly. Within 24 hours, a federal judge ordered the Klan to stop, handing over the materials immediately. It was one of the few times Fred wielded the law like a sword. But he wasn't defending himself. He was defending childhood itself. Parody never bothered him, at least not when it came from a place of humor. Eddie Murphy's Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood made him chuckle. But when someone dressed his likeness in malice, that's when the cardigan came off. A burger. King ad in 1984 featured a look-alike selling fast food. One courteous phone call from Fred, and it disappeared. Yet when a T-shirt surfaced showing a cartoon version of him holding a gun, he took legal action without hesitation. He didn't care about being mocked. He cared about trust. Children believed in him, and he believed in honoring that belief. That same deep loyalty defined his personal life. In 1952, he proposed to Joanne Bird with a handwritten letter. She was so thrilled she lost it on her way to the phone to say yes. Their love wasn't showy. It was made of quiet rituals and mutual respect. They had 2 sons, James and John, both of whom appeared on the show and later confirmed that the man America adored was no different in their living room. Joanne remained his steady anchor through every season of his life. Fred's commitment to living with intention ran through every part of his day. He swam laps each morning, prayed, read the Bible, and followed a disciplined routine. For more than 30 years, he maintained a weight of exactly 143 pounds, a number he held dear because it meant, I love you. 1 for I, 4 for love, and 3 for you. Even the state of Pennsylvania recognized the depth of that message, naming the 143rd day of the year 143 Day in his honor. He avoided caffeine, never smoked, stayed away from meat, saying simply, I don't eat anything that has a mother, and capped his indulgence with just a small splash of Kahlua over ice cream. In a world of loud personalities and flashing lights, Fred Rogers remained a calm, unwavering presence. Through courtrooms, kitchens, parodies, and prayers, he proved that strength can be quiet, and love, when protected fiercely, can last a lifetime. The Gentle Goodbye of Fred Rogers. And when the world trembled, it was Fred's voice they longed to hear again. Though he had signed off from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on August 31, 2001, after 33 years and 895 episodes, the quiet wisdom he'd shared was still needed. Just 11 days later, the 9/11 attacks shook the nation. In a time of fear and confusion, Fred returned briefly, not with a full episode, but with a soft message. Look for the helpers. It was simple, powerful, and comforting, reminding everyone, not just children, that hope still lived among the chaos. His farewell to television had been thoughtful, every detail chosen with care. That final week, he celebrated one of his greatest passions, the arts. Even Lady Elaine, the neighborhood's lovable troublemaker, handed out awards in a pretend art contest. Fred closed the show with words that felt like a gentle embrace. You always make each day a special day. You know how? By just your being you. But Fred was also preparing families for real goodbyes. Long before his illness, he had worked closely with child psychologists, helping parents speak honestly to their children about death and grief. He encouraged truth over avoidance and made it okay for kids to hear, "I don't know, but I believe." In late 2002, Fred began to feel unwell. Stomach pain turned out to be cancer, already advanced by the time doctors found it. Yet he kept showing up, even serving as Grand Marshal of the Rose Parade in January 2003. After surgery and a short hospital stay, he returned home, sat at the piano, and played. On February 27, 2003, just one day after his grandson's birthday, Fred Rogers passed away quietly in his Pittsburgh home. The country grieved, but his legacy remained. A steady belief that kindness, no matter how small, can still move the world. But what do you think made Fred Rogers' gentle voice so powerful that even in America's darkest hour, the nation turned back to him for comfort? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.